that. And let me spotlight Bobbi. Sometime I'll make this a smoother process, but for now, it takes a little time. And everyone go ahead and mute. I can help you out a little bit. And Bobbi, take it away.
Okay, so here we are. We're back with Harriet Tubman. Who was Harriet Tubman? And we're on chapter 4. I'm just going to do a little recap. And the recap is when Harriet marries a free man who was not a slave. And to get ready for her marriage, she did this beautiful quilt with many, many bright different colors. And she was very proud of it. And here is a picture of her husband. Okay. Now, Harriet has the idea, and she's had it for a long time, about escaping to freedom. If you remember, she tried to convince her brothers to go with her. And they were just about off the plantation, but they got scared. And they said, we got to go back. And Harriet didn't want to go, but they said, no, if we're caught, we're going to be punished. So Harriet went back with them, right? She didn't get a chance to go. So now she's trying to convince her husband that they should both flee so that she could be free. And then even though he was free, he could earn more money and they could live together as a free couple. But he also was very scared. So again, Harriet knew that if she was going to run for freedom, she was going to have to do it by herself. So this is where chapter 4 begins. I'm going to read you one page before, just to get us into that. In 2 nights, a slave trader would be coming for Harriet and her brothers. Harriet faced a hard choice. If she stayed, she would be put on a chain gang. She would probably die on the long walk south. But if she escaped, who would go with her? Not her husband, John, not her brothers. She decided to run away all by herself. She went to bed as usual, and when John was asleep, shows him in their little cabin, she started packing, but that didn't take long because all she did was put a little salt pork and cornbread in a bandana. She took the quilt that she had made, and she didn't take any more. Harriet slipped out of the house. Finally, she was on her way to freedom. Harriet was going to make her dream come true. Harriet walked through the dark woods. She moved without making a sound. Ben had taught her well. Ben had also told her that bloodhounds could not follow a scent through water, so she waded through streams whenever she could. Finally, she came to the house of the Quaker woman that was kind to her. The Quaker woman let her in, but she told Harriet it was not safe for her to stay. Harriet would have to leave that night. The Quaker woman told her what to do next. Harriet was so grateful. She wanted to thank the woman, but how? Harriet gave her the wedding quilt and said goodbye. That was Harriet's most beautiful, precious thing, and she handed it to the woman that helped her start her journey. Harriet had a long trip ahead of her. First, she followed the Chopton River in Maryland. When it got light, she hid. When it was dark, she started moving again, just like her father, Ben, had told her to do. The river was 40 miles long, and it was only the beginning of her trip. Slowly, Harriet kept going. When the river ended, she followed a road to Camden, Delaware. Okay, I'm just going to show you, this would be in Delaware. You can see how flat the land is. This could be the river that she's following, okay? But again, only at night. She looked for a white house with green shutters. The Quaker woman had told her to do this. The woman in the White House was named Eliza Hunn. She let Harriet stay with her for 3 days. She gave Harriet new clothes and food for the trip. And then Harriet set out again. And this is Harriet wading through the water. Okay. Remember, if she wades through the water, the dogs will not be able to smell her, to follow her scent. Harriet had become a traveler on the Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad had no tracks or whistles or cars, but it had a series of stops, homes or stores of Quakers and abolitionists where runaway slaves could find shelter. The Underground Railroad had its own special code words to trick the white slave owners. Escaping slaves might be called bundles, parcels, or packages. One blade of cotton might mean one slave. Two small blades might mean the escaping slaves with children. Slave hunters were everywhere. They got rewards for bringing back runaway slaves. Harriet knew her master would be looking for her. She used her bandana to cover her scar. She traveled at night, and sometimes she dressed as a man or a fancy lady with a veil. In these clothes, she was safe. And it shows her leaving the house, and it shows her dressed up like a man. Okay. Finally, she reached the free state of Pennsylvania. Now Harriet was a free woman. Later, Harriet said how she felt. I looked at my hands to see if I was the same person now that I was free. There was such a glory over everything. The sun came out like gold through the trees and over the fields, and I felt like I was in heaven. Okay, and there she was. So the idea of freedom was so strange and wonderful. She felt like she had become a whole new person. But freedom was not easy. Years later, Harriet said, I was free, but there was no one to welcome me to the land of freedom. I was a stranger in a strange land. It was true. Her home, her family, and her friends were in Maryland. One day she would go back to get them. Harriet took a job cooking and cleaning in a Philadelphia hotel. She didn't like the work, but compared to being a slave, it was easy. All the money she earned was hers to keep. If she truly hated her job, she could also leave it. No one could force her to stay. And that's like a drawing of maybe the hotel where she worked and did the cooking and the cleaning. After work, Harriet went to visit the office of the Philadelphia Vigilance Committee. This was a group of people who helped runaway slaves. The men and women there sometimes had news of Harriet's family back in Maryland. Harriet learned that her sister Mary and Mary's family were going to be sold. Harriet decided she had to go back to Maryland. Her sister's family needed her. She would bring them north. William Steele was the secretary of the Vigilance Committee, and he was her friend. He warned her not to go. It was too dangerous, but she wouldn't listen. A clever plan was devised. Harriet's Quaker friends got the plan to John Bowley. He was married to Harriet's sister, Mary. John was a free man, although his wife and children were slaves, and his wife and children were going to be sold away from him and going on a chain gang down south. By the time John got the plan, his family had already been taken to the slave auction, but they had not been sold yet. It was lunchtime, and the auctioneer was taking a break. He would sell the rest of the slaves after he had eaten lunch. Right then, John Bowley walked to the slave pen. Remember, this is where his wife and children are. In his hand, he held a large white envelope with a message inside. He handed it to the guard watching the slaves. The message said that Mary's master already had a buyer for her and the children. John was to take Mary and the children to the inn where the auctioneer was having lunch. The message was a trick. It was not from Mary's master, but the guard did not suspect anything. John took Mary, his wife, and his children, and quickly they went down the street, but they could not run. They had to go very slowly and pretend nothing was happening, even if it was the middle of the day and they were escaping. They tried to walk calmly so as not to attract attention. Finally, what seemed like a long walk, they came to a house with a picket fence. Inside was a Quaker man. He was the one who had written the message. The Quaker took the family up to the attic. And here's John delivering the message to the auctioneer, and there's his wife and children. So the message says to let his Mary and the children go because they've already found a buyer for them. And there they are walking through the town. They have to pretend this is not an escape, that they're going to go to the masters, but they're not. They went to the Quakers and he took them upstairs to the attic where they could hide. And there he's peeping out from the trap door. Night came. It was time to leave. The family crept out and went into a wagon. The Quaker man covered them with blankets and drove them to a river. A fishing boat filled with blankets and food was waiting for them. John sailed the boat up the Chesapeake River in Maryland. He was told to sail towards Baltimore. He had to look for 2 lights, one blue and one yellow. John sailed all night long. As morning came, he worried. How would he see the lights in the daytime? But he did, and he guided the boat to them. A white woman was on the shore, waiting in the wagon. Okay, and she's got 2 lights on the wagon post right here. One was yellow and one was blue. And the wagon has blankets and food for them. And there they are. They're escaping in that fishing boat. And the sun is coming up. They're just barely able to see the lights. "Who are you?" she asked. "A friend with friends," John answered, for this was the code phrase he had been told to say. The woman greeted him warmly and helped the family into her wagon. She covered them with blankets and bags of onions and potatoes. And next she drove them to a stable where they got out of the wagon and waited again till it was dark. And then she helped them back into the wagon and drove them to a brick house in Maryland. The white woman knocked on the door and then they all went inside. There was Harriet Tubman, waiting for them. She had arranged for the boats and for the wagon. And there's Harriet reunited with her sister and her niece and her nephew and Mary's husband, John Bowman. Now Harriet was ready to lead them north. John and Mary saw that Harriet had a pistol. She had brought it with the money she earned. Armed with a gun and her knowledge of the swamps, Harriet led her sister's family from station to underground station. They hid during the day and traveled at night. At times they walked. At other times they went by boat or wagon. Finally, they arrived safely in Philadelphia. It was the first time Harriet had been a conductor on the Underground Railroad, but it was certainly not the last. We're going to stop there in this chapter book. We're going to pick up a picture book with gorgeously illustrated. It's called Minty. Okay. And there, the artist is imagining Harriet as a young girl, and this was her nickname, Minty. So we're going to go back in time, back, even before Harriet started her mission of being a conductor. This is Harriet when she's a child, okay? This is like over 200 years ago, all right? Minty, I know you hear me. Get in here, gal. Crouching in front of the big barn door, Minnie listened. Mrs. Broda sounded angrier than usual. Get in here, I say. Don't make me come out and get you. Minnie giggled and then stuck out her tongue, just as far as it could go. I'll come when I'm good and ready, she thought. But she didn't dare say it, not out loud. That would mean a whipping for sure. Pushing back the barn door, Minnie crept inside. The barn was her favorite hiding place. And there's Mrs. Brodas. She's yelling at her to come get in that house. And there's Minnie hiding. Okay. And she's got some chickens with her. Remember, she's only about 7 years old. Just a little kid. The dray horses watched, restless, as Minnie thrust her arms into a large pile of fresh hay. She dug deep down all the way to the bottom and pulled out her rag dog. The doll's name was Esther Lavina Louise, and she was a sorry sight with 1 foot missing and a pair of cracked buttons for eyes. But Minnie loved her just the same. Now listen, she said. Minnie started to tell her doll an old Bible story, the way her mother, Rita, had told her. And then the shepherd boy, David, Minnie said, he picked up this tiny little rock, took aim and sent it flying, hit old master smack in the head, killed him right there in front of everyone. Then they had a big old party afterwards, and David got to move into this big house with a long table, and he was never hungry or nothing again. When the story was finished, Minnie had Esther back at the bottom of the haystack. It was getting dark, and she had to light the fire, trim the wicks, and set the table up at the big house. And there's Minnie, and that's her dolly. And she's in the barn with the other animals. Okay. The evening at supper, Mrs. Brodus was still angry. Why didn't you come earlier when I called, girl? I had a mess of peas that needed shelling. Minnie looked down at her feet. I didn't hear any call. Don't lie to me, girl, unless you want a whipping. Next time you better jump to when I call. Mrs. Brodus took out her cloth napkin. I'm hungry. Serve the potatoes, Minnie. As Minnie reached for the bowl, she accidentally knocked over a pitcher of cider. Mrs. Brodus jumped to her feet. Now look what you've done. Angrily, she turned to her husband. Do you see, Edward? It's spite, pure and simple. Well, I won't stand for it. I don't want her in the house anymore. From now on, she's a field hand. That'll fix her. Then crossing the room, Mrs. Brodus opened one of the high cupboards and took something out. And there's Mrs. Brodus. She's very, very, very angry. And there's her husband, Edward, and look at all the rich, good foods that they have to eat. Minnie's eyes widened. It was her rag doll, Esther. You didn't think I knew, did you, said Mrs. Brodus. Here, she told her husband, take this and throw it in the fire. No, Mrs., Minnie screamed. She lunged for it, but Mrs. Brodus was faster. With a flick of her wrist, she hurled the doll into the open fireplace. Minnie kicked and screamed, but Mrs. Brodus held her back until the doll was nothing more than a pile of white ashes. That'll learn you, she said. Now get out of here. And don't forget, you're a field slave now. Minnie ran out of the door, choking back her tears. This is Mrs. Brodus. She's got the doll right up here. And there's Minnie begging her not to throw it in the fire. Okay. And there's her husband. Later that night, while her brothers and sisters slept, Minnie told her mother and father what had happened. Well, said old Ben, at least they're keeping you on. What if they sold you south, Minnie? I've seen them do it less than spilling a pitcher of cider. Oh, Rit put aside her sewing. Come here, girl, she said. There's something I got to say to you. Missy laid her head down on old Rit's lap. It was soft and warm, and she felt like feeling her mother's hand, like it ran gently across her forehead. Listen to me, Minnie. Now that you're in the field, you got to do a good job, because there ain't no other place for them to send you but downriver, and you don't want that. Once they sell you south, you'll never come back. I'm going to run away, Minnie mumbled. I am going to run. Oh, Rit shook her head. Oh, no, you're not. That's what you always say, and it ain't never going to happen. You know what my daddy had told me. If your head is in the lion's mouth, you best pat him a little. Your head's in his mouth, Minnie, but you sure ain't doing any patting. You're just fixing to get your head bit off. Oh, Rit bent down to whisper, pat the line, Minnie. It ain't going to kill you. And there's her mom, oh, Rit. And there's Minnie, her head on her lap. And there's her dad, that's Ben. Mom's telling her, you got to be careful. They're going to sell you way away from us. The next morning at dawn, Minnie was sent to work in the fields. Again, remember, she's only like 7 years old. For the next few months, her job was to plant wheat and rye and to tend to the young corn. It was heavy, hard work, but Minnie liked being outside. The breeze felt good on her forehead, and sometimes when no one was looking, she pushed her toes deep into the dirt and pretend she was a sunflower rising up and up all the way till she could see clear across the Chesapeake Bay, till she could reach the clear blue sky. Okay, there she is. Okay, she's pretending she's a sunflower. There's another lady. She's bending down and working and say, boy, Minnie, you better be careful. They're gonna see you're not working. They're gonna get mad. You're gonna get a whipping. When July came and with it the heat and mosquitoes, some days Minnie could hardly see what she was doing. She had so much sweat dripping into her eyes. You ought to wear a bandana, said the woman next to her. Say, you're a little one. How old are you anyway? I'm 8 years old now, said Minnie. The old woman smiled, holding out her hand. My name's Amanda. My name's Minnie. That's a pretty name, Amanda said. Real pretty. Be quiet, said the overseer, knocking the butt of his whip against his glossy black boot. Amanda lowered her voice to a whisper. Tell your mama to make you a bandana. Or girl, you're going to fry your brains out. Whenever she was working in the fields, Minnie kept looking for a way to escape. The dirt road behind the barn led to the Choptank River, but Minnie had no idea where the river went. And what if there were snakes in the water? Minnie was scared of snakes. I know what you're thinking, Amanda whispered. I can see it in your eyes. You're fixing to run away, but they'll catch you. And when they do, she pointed to a deep scar on her forehead. Believe me, honey, I tried it and it ain't worth it. And there's Minnie with her new friend, Amanda. Okay, and she is wearing a bandana now. And Amanda's telling her, don't run, it ain't worth it. Later that day, the overseer Sanders rode up on his horse and pointed at Minnie. You, he said, come with me. Running behind the horse, Minnie followed him down the trail to the big Buckwater River. There, next to the bank, she saw a thick rope stretched across the surface of the water. Get in, Sanders ordered. But I can't swim, and Mister is cold. Don't sass me, girl. I said get in there and take hold of that rope. He watched as Minnie waded into the water. You see those traps, the steel ones? Those are muskrat traps. Mr. Brodus wants you to check every one. And if there's a muskrat caught, you stuff him in here. The overseer thrust a heavy sack at Minnie, then spat into the water. Don't you get any ideas now? Remember, I got eyes in the back of my head. Then spurring his horse, Sanders galloped off. Slowly, Minnie started downstream, holding tight to the rope. Okay, there's the overseer, Sanders. And there's the rope she's hanging on to. Okay, she's 8 years old now, a little bit more than 7. And she doesn't know how to swim, which is why she's holding onto the rope. The first 2 traps were empty, but inside the third, a fat, glossy muskrat was struggling to get free. Squatting down, Minnie pulled apart the steel jaws of the trap. She glanced back to make sure Sanders was out of sight. Then happily, she let the muskrat go, releasing it downstream. It swam away vigorously, propelling itself through the water with its long, flat tail. Minnie's eyes were wide with excitement. Go, go, she cried, splashing at the water. Go, swim away. She turned to the next trap, and she did the same thing, releasing the second muskrat into the cold, muddy river. She was prying open a third one when she heard a soft noise behind her. Sanders was sitting on his horse, not 10 feet away. And there's the muskrat, free, thanks to Minnie. Okay, where's Minnie? Here's Minnie. There she is, splashing the water and telling the muskrat to swim as fast as he could. For a long moment, he and Minnie stared at each other. Then suddenly, Minnie dropped the trap and she started to run. Sanders caught up with her at once. Jumping down, he bound her wrists together with a short piece of twine. That was a stupid thing to do. You'll be sorry, gal. He took her back to the big house where Mrs. Brodus was on the porch, cracking walnuts. She listened to what Sanders had to say. Minnie never got a chance to speak for herself. Whip her, Mrs. Brodus ordered. Whipped her good. And if it happens one more time, you tell my husband here, we'll sell her south. They'll know what to do with her in Georgia. The overseer tied Minnie to a fence. Oh, Rit, her mom, was watching from a distance. As soon as she saw Sanders raise the whip, she dropped to the ground, her hands over her ears. Oh, Lord, let it be quick, she moaned. Let it be quick, please, God. Let it be over. And there's Minnie. It's Mrs. Brodas, and there's the overseer Sanders. And she's got her hands all bound together. Later, by candlelight, Rit, her mom, did what she could to help Minnie get through the night. Now, this will hurt some, she said, smearing green salve on Minnie's back. Oh, baby, don't cry. Don't do it. Here, bite down on this. It will help. And she forced a hickory stick between Minnie's teeth. I told you not to aggravate him. I told you. Why didn't you listen, Minnie? Don't you got any sense? It was several days before Minnie could walk again. Then early one morning, she was sent back to the fields where the rye and wheat stood tall. But Amanda was no longer there. Minnie learned she had been sold south. And you're next, Sanders told her. I got my eye on you. And there's Minnie. She's got the hickory stick in her mouth so she won't be crying when her mom puts that salve on her back. And there's her mom. And there's her dad, Ben. That evening, Minnie told her father she was going to run away. And I mean it this time, she said. Oh, I believe you, Minnie. Only problem is you don't know where you're running to. Oh, Ben rose from his chair. Come outside with me, Minnie. There's something I want to show you. Silently, they walked towards the barn. Oh, Ben lit his pipe and then pointed up at the sky. Do you see that star, he asked, that bright one? That's the North Star, Minnie. Do you see all those stars next to it? With his finger, he traced the outline of the Big Dipper. That's the drinking gourd, he said. Now you listen to me. If you're gonna run, first of all, you make sure it's nighttime. The darker, the better. And before you do anything else, you look up and find the North Star. It'll be the only marker you'll have, and don't lose it. Oh, Ben reached for Minnie's hand. You follow that star. It will take you north all the way to Philadelphia. Minnie looked up at the dome of the sky. To her, all the tiny stars looked alike. Show me again, she said. Oh, Ben pulled her close. With the stem of his pipe, he began painting a picture of freedom in the clear night sky. And there's Minty and old Ben, her dad. Okay, and he's showing her where to find the North Star. Got to get up to the sky, way up there. The next morning, Ben told Rit that every Sunday he was going to take Minnie into the woods. If she's planning to run away, there's some things she ought to know first. Rit didn't like the idea one bit. She was scared, but Ben told her to stay out of it. I know what I'm doing, he said. One of the first things he taught Minnie was how to read a tree. If you ever get lost and you don't know which way is north, just look at the moss growing on the tree. It always grows on the north side. Can you remember that? Minnie nodded, and then she stretched out her fingers to touch the yellow-green moss. It felt fuzzy and a little brittle. She scraped some off the bark. Don't eat it, Ben warned. It'll make you sick as a dog. And there's Ben. Okay, and he's pointing out the moss on the north side of the tree. That summer, deep in the forest, Minnie learned how to catch and skin a squirrel. She learned to do bird calls, and before long, she could run barefoot through the woods without making a sound. She learned how to catch fish with nothing more than a piece of string and a bent nail. And in the still, muddy waters of the creek, Ben taught her how to swim. That's right, he said. Keep your head down. Don't move your arms so much. You're doing fine. The only thing Minnie couldn't learn was how to start a fire. Ben watched as she struck at the flint, trying to get a spark. Just keep at it, he told her. You'll get the hang of it. And there's Ben encouraging her when she's learning how to swim. She's working mighty hard to learn all these survival skills that her dad's teaching her. On the last day of summer, Ben and Minnie took a tin bucket into the woods and filled it to the top with blackberries. And they climbed a hill overlooking the river and watched the sunset. By the time they got back to the cabin, it was already dark. Rit put her hand into the bucket, laughed. I know just what to do with these, she said, pouring the plucked berries into a big wooden bowl. Minnie, you go up to the big house and ask Missy for some sugar and 2 cups of flour. Tell her I want to make a pie, if she'll let me. Go on now, and you hurry back. Okay, there's Minnie. Okay, there's Rit telling her what to do. 2 cups of flour and some sugar, and she's got the bucket to put the flour in. Her big bare legs shivering, Minnie started up the dirt path. The night air was cool and autumn was coming on. She had nearly reached the big house when she saw a buckskin mare tied to an oak tree out front. Minnie figured it belonged to a guest, someone visiting the Brodas. The horse stood very still, watching her with uneasy eyes. Minnie was about to turn away when a thought suddenly occurred to her. Reaching up, she placed her hand on the saddle. It was still warm and not too high. This is it. This is my chance to run away. I'm going to get on that horse and go north. Remembering what old Ben had told her, she looked at the sky. There it was. The North Star was shining bright. And there's the horse. And there's Minty. And inside, the person is visiting with the Broduses. You can see the North Star is up there. Okay, still very, very little, 8 or 9 years old at this point. By now, Minnie's heart was beating rapidly. She wanted to run back to tell Ben goodbye, but she knew there was no time. It was now or never. Holding her breath, Minnie reached for the rope. She tried to untie the knot, but her hands were shaking badly. The horse let out a Minnie. Shh, he whispered, don't be afraid. But it was her own fear that was growing. Then, just as the knot started to come undone, the door of the big house opened. Minnie heard her master's voice. Come outside, Nathan. Let's have a smoke. At that moment, Minnie lost her courage. She couldn't do it. Not now, not tonight. With tears in her eyes, she ran back down the hill to the cabin. Okay. And this is Minnie. And she's hearing Mr. Brodas come out of the house. And there's the horse. Decided, I'm not going to do it now. At the door, old Rick caught her by the shoulder. Where's the flower? What did Mrs. say? And Minnie pulled back and wouldn't answer. Leave her be, said Ben. Just leave her be, Rick. I'll go fetch the flower. That night, after everyone else was asleep, Minnie sat next to the fire thinking, why hadn't she jumped on the buckskin horse? She could be a long way gone by now, halfway to Philadelphia. She might never get the chance again. And she began to cry. She cried for a long time until the fire had nearly burnt itself out. It was getting cold in the cabin, and to keep warm, she buried her toes in the ashes at the edge of the pit. Up at the big house, the dog started to bark. Oh, Rit stirred in her sleep. Minnie sniffled, and she wiped her nose with the back of her hand. Someday she was going to run away. She would jump on that horse's back, and she would ride. She would ride. The north wind whipping through her hair, and nothing would stop her, nothing. Minnie could feel her eyes beginning to close. Then little by little, she fell asleep. Curled up between her brothers and sisters, she dreamed of sunflowers and stars and the call of the whippoorwill, and a road through the forest that one day, when she had the courage, would carry her to freedom. And there she is. And she's drying her tears. And she finally got back to sleep. She knew that one day, and we know that she did, right? She did go all the way to Philadelphia, and she made it safely there. And I have one more little poem to read, and it's a poem that I read last week, but I think the more we know about Harriet Tubman, more this poem is going to mean to us. And there's a picture of Harriet. Okay. And she's older. And she's done all the conducting, and she's been a spy with the Union Army, and she's been a nurse. And she's not even actually that old at that point. This is a poem called The Conductor Was a Woman. This line ain't got no tracks. This road ain't got no rails. Bloodhounds are howling, hunting for her trail. The stations are hideouts. The conductor holds a gun. She stops at each plantation for slaves on the run. Hear her whistle blowing. It's a hoot owl at the break of dawn. Loose those chains and shackles. Tell not a soul that you're gone. Steal away with the rags upon your back. Run until your bare feet bleed. Her train won't jump the track. Won't let nobody turn her round. She's been through fire and rain. The North Star is the headlight on her Harry freedom train. Okay. That's from Remember the Bridge. Okay. Book of Poems. Okay. I don't even know what time it is, but those are our stories for the day. We're pretty good. Okay. So now if we can get